empty the chamber on him. And how do you do that? First 6 seconds, point A to point B, everything you got. Everything you got. Turn that shit up. Let's go.
Welcome to the Scoop World Order, Bill Greene edition. We are going to be talking about some of the movers and shakers in recruiting. Big stretch coming up for the Buckeyes after the Toledo game. We got Wisconsin. We'll get some visitors for that. The big home Michigan game's coming up. So there's a lot of recruiting stuff going on. Need to find some more players, new ends, new tackles in the game. But first, as always, thank you guys so much for subscribing. As always, we appreciate you guys. Comment. Which recruit do we need? Simpson Okunloa, Mateo Uyangalele. There are some big names out there, some big guys that Ohio State has a very heavy presence in their recruiting, and we're about to find out a little bit more info. With that being said, I'm going to bring in the number one recruiting guy in the country, Bill the Bank Greene. Bank, how are you today?
Good, man. What's going on?
Good. You hit him straight today on the course?
Not very well.
It's all
It's
good,
a beautiful day out. Weather was great.
Right. That tan is on point. There's a lot of South Florida movement with your guys down there, JJ Smith, Josiah. Obviously, we got Ennis in the fold and those guys. But we're gonna move into the big bodies. A name that is on a lot of people's minds right now: Simpson Okunloa, a kid that hasn't been to Columbus. I have my skepticism about him because he's seemingly visited every campus in the country except for Ohio State. But there are people that think that there's some movement there. What do you know about Simpson? He's a 5-star tackle. Everybody in the world knows we need 5-star tackles more than any position in the world. What are your thoughts on Simpson at this point in time?
Yeah, I think he's taken 3 officials so far. I think he's been to Michigan State, shockingly. He's been to Alabama, and he's been to Miami. And my intel is that Miami thinks they got that baby locked. So maybe there was an NIL movement there that, hasn't become public, but Miami sure feels like he's not going anywhere. The good thing is I believe he has 2 official visits left. And when it comes to Ohio State, I've also heard Georgia's pushing, Florida's pushing, so you got the first thing is you have to get him on campus. Okay. And until he shows up and that plane lands and he walks off and he's there for a 48-hour visit, I can't. It's hard for me to take it seriously. I know there's smoke out there. There's no smoke that from my end when it comes from my Miami people. My Miami people think he is a done freaking deal to the Canes. And until I see him, if he shows up at Ohio State, man, my antenna's coming up because I know how well Mark Pantoni and those dudes do those official visits. And if he shows up at Ohio State, that tells me that the Canes aren't the lock. He's still looking. He's still searching. Because if you have a couple visits left and you're waiting till November or so to take him, Columbus, Ohio is not usually a destination spot in November. So if he comes to Ohio State, then my antenna is coming up because that's going to tell me 2 things. Number 1, Miami's not a lock. And number 2, he's not coming to Columbus in November to check out the weather and the girls walking around with sweatshirts and jeans. He's serious. So I got to see that visit, Kirk, before I get hepped up about Ohio State's chances with Okunloa.
Yeah, and for me personally, I'm kind of stunned that we haven't been able to pull more tackles outside of the in-state kids, and because when you have DeJuan and Paris both going to the NFL after this year, you had a wide open depth chart. There's some guys like Zen Mikulski, Fitzpatrick. You got a couple guys that could potentially be the tackles next year. I honestly think that Donnie Jackson's going to be in our left tackle next year, but that depth chart is about as enticing as I've ever seen. Yeah, when I worked at Ohio State for Mark Pantoni as the offensive line GA, we used to literally make depth charts when a recruit would come to town, and it'd be like, okay, we'll move this kid to guard and make it look as clean and free as you could possibly make it, so that there's not another tackle that's going to be here except for you. You'll be in the 2 deep the second you sign and get here. And is it surprising to you that some of these 5-star, Olasaleinen, Simpson Okunloa, that it's been so tough for us to get these tackles here? Because with the depth chart, I can't imagine that there's a team in the country that has a cleaner depth chart, because we're literally losing both tackles. And this past weekend, Nick Patriot-Fair started for the Titans at right tackle, and Thayer Munford actually played a significant amount
Wow.
versus the Chargers. So I mean, our two tackles from last year got drafted. They both made teams. They're both making 100 grand a week or whatever they're making right now for rookie minimum. And then, Paris will probably be a top 10 pick after his film the first 2 weeks. And then DeWan will probably be top 3 round pick, right tackle type, Orlando Brown Jr. type kid. Is it surprising you that we can't reel in some more of these national big time tackles?
Well, the only thing is Justin Fry came over from UCLA, and at UCLA, I don't think he was recruiting against Bama, Georgia, that Ohio State level. I don't think he was recruiting that level of kids. So he's got to form relationships with these kids. You know what I mean? If Ohio State had poached the offensive tackle from Georgia and brought him in, he would know all these kids. The relationships would be formed. Justin Fry, West Coast guy, UCLA, he wasn't battling Bama. So I think you got to give Justin a pass. The one thing he did do, he did corral the in-state kids he wanted. And people say, oh, Ohio State always gets the in-state kids. No, I can give you a list of in-state offensive linemen that shows other schools under Greg Studrawa. So Ohio State does not automatically get the in-state offensive linemen. So I give him a lot of credit. He locked those guys up that he needed. And I'm going to wait a year before I start worrying about Justin Fry going against the big boys for the top kids, because he got hired in January. The relationships were already formed. A lot of those kids had already visited Georgia and Bama and schools like that. And here they might have even visited Ohio State, but now they're starting over with Stud gone and Fry in. So you got to give the guy a year, I think. Same with those DB coaches. You know what I mean? You're now forming relationships with kids you didn't have, and you're behind the 8 ball. So yeah, I'm not panicking on Justin Fry yet. And maybe Samson Okunlola shows up for the Michigan game, blown away and commits to Ohio State. And then we're not having this conversation. We're going to have a conversation just praising Justin Fry to high heaven. You got to let the game end. You can't look at this thing after 6 innings. You got to wait till all 9 innings are played.
Yeah, and I totally agree, and I think that's it's a really interesting point you bring up when you talk about Tim Walton was a guy in the NFL, so obviously he isn't recruiting anybody. Perry Eliano is coming from Cincinnati, so he's recruiting against Memphis and Louisville, and then you get like Jim Knowles is at Oklahoma State, and generally if you're at Oklahoma State and a kid gets a Texas or an Oklahoma or a USC offer, you're probably gonna cross them off the list. So how long of a leash do you give some of these students? Because again, I'm not critical at all, because I think Jim Knowles has been as good of a hire as we've ever had as a coordinator.
Oh, yeah. He doesn't have to recruit anyone.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, how long, or what is the runway? With Jim, I mean, our defense is playing at just a different level.
Yeah.
Different intensity, different attitude. The effort is outstanding. And the thing I love about Jim Knowles is if you don't show up ready to play and you let some guys get behind you or you take some bad penalties, he's going to hook you. He's not going to let you figure it out in a second. Like Denzel found that out the hard way. Josh Proctor found that out the hard way. And, it'll be interesting to see if Denzel, I mean, I imagine he'll start this week. Josh Proctor was back after getting the hook versus Notre Dame, but I love that mentality. But how long of a runway do you give some of these these newer coaches that are maybe jumping the level recruiting wise? Because again, when you're Jim and you're not going against Georgia, you're not going against Nick and Kirby Smart and Florida and like those types. And when you're at Oklahoma State, UCLA, Cincinnati, the NFL, how long of a runway do you give these guys? And obviously, I'm sure that the runway gets extended when their position group is excelling, but how long of a runway do you give these guys, Bank?
Well, I think about this time next year. Well, when you get to the end of the camp season in June, dead period comes in July. Then when things start back up, you've either got guys committed by then, hopefully, and if not, you should have a long list of visitors coming in and official visits set. So I think, in another, by next June, July, we should have a really good idea of where these guys are at as recruiters, because they've had all this time to get in with the kids that are currently juniors. You know what I mean? The 2024 guys, you've got a lot of time to get in with those guys, get to know them, form those relationships. So we'll see if where we're sitting next year having this conversation. I think it'll tell us a lot.
Yeah, and I hate to compare guys to Brian Heartland, because Brian, he's the guy that I think just does. Obviously, he's an outstanding guy. I've known Brian for obviously 15 years at this point, but actually longer than that, almost 20 years. But Brian, he's a guy, he kind of has maybe the greatest track record / path to becoming an elite recruiter, because he's the guy who's from Ohio. So he gets the natural, played at Ohio State, but then he gets drafted by the Miami Dolphins. So he lives in South Florida for a long time. And that's where it's just the absolute killing fields when it comes to getting 5-star top drawer talent. You talked about JJ Smith, talk about Brandon Ennis, Carnell Tate's up at IMG, JoJo Trader, Malachi Tony. It's hard to compare guys to Brian Heartland, but talk a little bit about what Brian has done from this recruiting class. Talk about his relationship that he's developed with, the most elite 7-on-7 team in the country in South Florida Express. And just talk about how, that can reap rewards for us. Because I think that you would agree that we're probably the leaders for JJ Smith, we're leaders for JoJo, even though he might flip the corner. Malachi Tony, these kids, they all love Ohio State. When I was growing up in Naples, Florida, it was like Hurricanes, Florida State. When I was growing up, Florida State was like what Alabama is now. They were the dominant top 5 every year, 90s, phenomenon. But talk a little bit about Brian, how he's kind of raised the bar for recruiting, and what can come from South Florida with Brian's tutelage and his aggression down there.
Yeah, it's funny because when I first got into this business, I covered Brian. He was one of the first recruits I covered. He was, it was just that class is when I first started doing this, and so I've known him a long time too, and, so happy with his success. And the thing that people don't get, I think the thing people miss about Brian, they see ex-NFL guy, ex-Ohio State guy, very charismatic, man. I mean, he's great on, and when you see him interviewed ever, I mean, he's amazing. He's got all that glitz, and man, he works his ass off. I mean, he's on top of every inch. I mean, I know those 7-on-7 guys, so they tell me, I mean, he outworks everybody. He outworks every other wide receiver coach in America. I mean, he's on it, man. And that's what it takes, because he's got all the other attributes that you need. You know what I mean? And this is sales, Kirk. I mean, you know what it is. So,
Oh yeah.
And he's got everything going for him. And then when you combine that with that amazing work ethic, I mean, he's driven to be a great recruiter. I mean, it's not a hobby for him. It's war. He's the best in the country. I mean, he's literally the best. I think the best recruiter in the country. And I think the work ethic is number one. I think that's why he leaves no stone unturned, and he's on top of everything, every minute of every day that he's into recruiting. I mean, and the proof's in the pudding.
Oh yeah.
But I think people miss the work ethic. I think people miss that. Got a great product to sell, a great offense. Ohio State's great. He's great. I know all that. But if you don't work it, you're not going to be successful. And we've seen coaches, I'm not mentioning any names, but we've seen coaches that were not even average recruiters at Ohio State. And, when you can walk into school with that block O on your chest, that's a huge advantage. But if you're a lazy recruiter or you don't like recruiting, it ain't going to work for you.
Yeah, and I lived it. I worked with guys that weren't great recruiters. I worked with guys that weren't charismatic. The block O is probably 75% of the equation, but when you're going against your guy Nick and Kirby, you got to be at 100%. You can't be 85%, put in a little bit of effort, and then they just run circles around you and they beat you like a rented mule in recruiting. But with Brian, it's interesting because I knew him, God, in 2005, and you were probably at these camps when I was a player as a freshman at Ohio State. Brian had a camp like 3 times.
Right.
To get an offer. And this is during the Jim Tressel era.
He was Darren Lee before Darren Lee went through that.
Yeah, and this is with Jim Tressel, where we weren't national, global recruiters. Like with Urban, it's like if you're an Ohio kid, you almost have to camp 70 times to get an offer. Where with Tress, it's like if you were good and you're kind of that borderline kid and you had a Purdue offer, then you showed up and did good, and Tress is probably going to offer you, you're probably going to be a Buckeye, but Brian had to come back like 3 times to get his offer. So, and I told him when I talked to him, I was like, I always respected that about you. Because, and again, like when he deals with these kids, and he's got these 5-star kids in his receiving room, and he'd be like, look, nobody handed me anything. I was the guy that had to go come back again. Go work on your hands. Go work on your routes. Come back again. It's like, and it's not the urban Terry McClory thing, but this was he had to grind. And when that kid committed, I'll never forget the summer of '05, before he was even allowed to register for class and start legally doing workouts. He was sleeping on my couch. He'd come down, sleep on my couch, and do 4 or 5 workouts during the week, during school, like during spring break. He'd come down and work out with the team, which, we didn't discourage it. I'm not sure if it was legal, but we didn't discourage it. And that's the kind of guy he was. He was maniacal, and he wasn't, when he showed up and was racing Santonio Holmes and Ted Ginn, he wasn't just trying to just keep up. He was trying to smoke those guys. And, not every guy's going to run as hard as they can during the summer, but Brian did. Brian, everything was like, he was like Steve Prefontaine. Like, it's a suicide pace, and today is a good day to die. That was Brian Heartland. And I always loved that. And he ran down on kickoff, and he was like a tough kid. He was a 4th round pick, and nobody handed him anything. And that's, I think that he carries that chip on his shoulder that he's had since he was 16 years old. And he still has that. And that's why I don't think that his ceiling is just being a receiver coach at Ohio State. I think his ceiling is like being Lincoln Riley and being that monster recruiter that takes over a program. And you see what Lincoln Riley's doing. Like, he saw that roster. He's like, we got to go get 50 new players to compete. And you see, they go get Jordan Addison, they go get that quarterback, and you're like, oh boy, I don't want to play. Like, if I'm the Buckeyes, I don't want to play USC tomorrow, because those guys can throw it all over the lot. And they got, Lincoln's a good recruiter. And I with Brian, I see a Lincoln. Like, I see a guy that could go and be a monster recruiter and go somewhere in the South. And, if he went to somewhere, I say Mario's going to do great, and the guy at Florida's going to do great. But eventually, like, you get Florida, you get Brian Heartland at a place where he can recruit, and they got some NIL money. Like, that would be scary. So that's what I think of Brian. But I'm going to get into a little bit of film here. We're going to watch our boy, the H-back. Your boy Ricky calls our boy Ennis the H-back. Brandon Ennis, probably my favorite player, one of my favorite players I've ever covered, just because he's such a nasty physical kid. He's had a kickoff return. He's had a bunch of bombs. He had on ESPN here, little tunnel screen. And this is great because he turns into Jerome Bettis on this one. Watch this one, Bank. He puts his foot in the ground. Look how many guys there are around him right here. Boom, boom. They even slow it down. That's not even me slowing it down. That's just how many guys are on him? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This guy's kind of jog. They got 5 guys, and they can't get our boy, the H-back. And he's just a grinder. He's a nasty kid. Love everything about him. So that's my one Ennis highlight. This is Calvin Simpson Hunt down in Houston. We watched him last week. You like this kid, don't you, Bank?
I really do. I love the length.
Yeah. Length. He's a nasty kid. I love if a corner likes to blitz, man, and get a sack. Like, that's wonderful. I'm always a big fan of that. But you like this DB class a pretty fair amount, don't you, Bank?
I do. I'd like it better, if they had Dijon.
Put a little Dijon on it. Yeah.
Dijon or Caleb Downs, I'd like it a lot better, so. But Calvin Simpson Hunt is one of my favorite kids in the class, and I think he's got a chance to be really, really good. I also like when I think we saw one last week where a receiver turned the corner on him and had like 2 blockers, and he split the blockers and just killed the kid. A lot of those corners don't want to come up and take on blockers and make tackles. That's not fun.
No, they don't want to get their nails dirty. And I'm telling you, like, when you find a corner that can play the run, I'm telling you that it's wonderful. And here he is in this straight man. And, again, it's just, he's quick. Yeah. He likes to play hard. He likes to, and the hard part about evaluating a corner in high school is a lot of these guys don't see any targets. Like, quarterbacks they're not going to pick on the guy going to Ohio State when, the other guy's going to Tulsa or wherever.
Right.
Like, you're not going to throw it at that guy. Yeah.
The thing I like too about him is if you watch full video and everything, not just clips, that team's really well coached. And I don't know that team at all. I don't know any coaches there. I know nothing about him, but he's really well coached. I don't know. Yeah. He might have maybe a private guy in the offseason he works. Somebody's taught him footwork, technique. He's really good. Yeah. So he could be a guy who could maybe play early. There's so many guys returning to Ohio State next year, though. It's going to be a wall ahead of him, but I don't know.
Hey, if you can cover and flip your hips, man, there's a spot for you. Yeah. I'm telling you, and like with Denzel, Denzel was a preseason All-American, and if you're Jim Knowles and a guy rest on his laurels. I'm not saying Denzel did that. And all of a sudden, you want to put some fresh guys in like J.K. Johnson or whatever. You never know. All right, here's our boy Luke.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's a guy that I don't know if he'd actually get bumped to 5, but he potentially could be a 5-star. Obviously, he's not going to play defensive tackle at Ohio State, but his highlight reels has some of that. But when you see him at offensive tackle and you see him kick, he's pretty smooth, and I think he's the guy that's probably the quickest guy. He's pancaking guys. He's a big athlete, man. He really is.
Yeah.
He's
Basketball. LeBron James basketball group. So
yeah,
and they don't put bums on that team, man. That basketball team is all athletes.
No, I mean, but like you see him. I mean, you see his kick, his mirror, and again, I don't know how good this end is, but you see the movement, the big speed, and again, that's why like next year at tackle, if he's a freshman and you put Donnie at left tackle, I'd put him and Fitzpatrick and Zen all at right tackle, let them all audition, and again, if you can pass block, then you can play in Ryan Day's offense. I mean, pass blocking is everything in modern football.
No doubt.
No doubt. Anybody can run block. And again, the thing about this is coming in, if you put a gun to my head and I had to rank these guys, I put Luke at 1, and then I'd probably put Josh 2 and Austin at 3, just because Austin Seyerveld's never pass blocked before because he runs a triple option. But the thing about it is if you had me list them last year, I wouldn't have had Tigra as the guy that would be going in at right guard the first time the young guys got to get into the game. But Tigra Tagovailoa was the first guy in out of that freshman class. So sometimes you never know until they hit campus. And he's lost weight.
Nope.
Yeah.
You never know.
I saw him on campus 2 weeks ago. I was at Adriatico's having a slice of pizza, and he's lost a lot of weight. Like I was like, Mick's, because when you show up in your head, exactly. When you show up and you're heavy with Mick, man, it is like, it's like the biggest loser. They're going to run you to death, and you're going to be losing 100 pounds before you're ready to get on that field.
Yeah,
but
he was easily 30 pounds overweight.
Yeah. And he looked a lot leaner because Mick got hold of him. They put him in at right guard, and he hung in there. He wasn't dominant by any stretch, and he's not ready for prime time, but he, there's a couple guys that were rated ahead of him. He was probably the lowest rated guy in the class, and he hung in there a little bit. I mean, you're playing Arkansas State, but it's hard to play as a freshman.
They got eight plays or something.
Yeah.
Him and Jacob James and Zen Machowski, that group. I think they got 8 plays.
Yeah. And again, it's, but it just shows what Justin Fry thinks of him, that he's the guy they put in at that right guard, because you put a Carson Hinsman, and there's some younger guys that, again, I'm not trying to be negative, but if you have a true freshman beating you out, you better start looking around a little bit, because they're, I mean, again, if I had a true freshman going before me and I'd been in the program for 2-3 years, I'd be, thinking, it's not looking good, because if you get beat out by a guy younger than you, it's generally not a good deal in football. But yeah, I think Luke's really good. I mean, they had a tough start. They started off 0-2. They got their first win, but Luke, he's got his brother who's a really good player playing quarterback.
Yeah.
But Luke's a good kid. He's got a good mirror. He's a great athlete, which again, that gives me some promise. I think that, he's got a lot of intangibles. He's trying to be a leader of the class. And again, we talk about it every week, how he's not a quarterback, so no one's going to come play with Luke Montgomery like they will Dylan Raiola, but at least he's trying, that's like the funny thing is he's trying to be the alpha, even though it's harder when you're a tackle.
He does his job. He does his part. And that's all you ask of the guy. I mean, he loves recruiting. I mean, I'll tell you that. And he's on these guys.
Oh, he's
a great representative of the class.
Yeah,
great.
And he reminds me of Mike Brewster so much that it's almost scary. Because they almost look like they have the same kind of face, hair, same personality. They're both tackles in high school, and they have to finish blocks, and they both play both ways, and again, they're both, I mean, Michael thought that Josh Jenkins was going to be part of the Blocko Brew crew or whatever, and that didn't happen. So they get played a little bit by some of these kids, but that's fine. They'll see him on the field hopefully one day. But you feel, do you think that he has any shot at getting bumped up to a 5-star by some of the national services, or would you rank him as a 4-star, a 5-star?
Yeah, I think he's a high 4. The film I've seen, I think he's a high 4, and that's great.
Yeah.
You know, if he'd have been an O lineman since 6th grade, maybe he'd be a little further along.
Yeah.
Um, you know, he was a D end, a tight end, and
Yeah.
I don't know. I like him a lot, though. I really like him a lot. I mean, and he's a kid. He's gonna get what he's supposed to get. You know, I don't
Yeah.
know what his ceiling is. You would know better than me, but whatever
Yeah.
that ceiling is, he's gonna get there. You know,
Yeah.
he's not gonna be outworked, or he's not gonna have a bad attitude. And it's just, none of those things are gonna happen with this kid. It's too good a kid from too good a family. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
His dad played ball. You know, this group
Mhm.
this family knows what they want, and Luke's going to get what he's supposed to get, which I think is going to be really good.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's a level-headed kid. I
Oh
think
yeah,
he's got
mature.
amazing for he'll be 315. He'll have great movement skills. He'll probably run a 4.8 40. And again, that's why I think that he could potentially be in the mix to start at right tackle as a freshman. And I mean that sounds
He's going to
crazy,
play.
but
He's going to be
yeah,
in that two deep almost
yeah,
by default. He's going to be in that
no,
two deep, and I think if he doesn't start next year, he's going to start in 2024 for absolutely. He will start that year.
yeah.
Second
And
year,
I
he's
mean,
a starter, the tackle.
yeah, yeah. And again, like it's the way kids are developed and the way the strength training is now. Like Quinn Ewers against Bama, and you know how good Bama secondary is. Like Quinn's really like a true freshman age wise. So it's like
Right,
he's going out
right.
there going against Kool-Aid and the number one, Jordan Battle. And I mean, Jordan
That's
Battle
right.
played against Ohio State in 2020, which seems like it was an eternity ago, but that's how good that secondary, how veteran that secondary is.
Oh,
And
they're loaded.
Will
They're loaded.
Anderson and Nick and I mean, that kid's an 18-year-old. So kids are more developed now than they were when I came out. It was almost like a foregone conclusion. Guys are going to redshirt unless they were just freaks of nature like Maurice
Superman,
Clarett.
yeah.
But yeah, because the training is so much better. The 7-on-7 is great for developing skills and and the personal training and the nutrition is better. And so
Yeah.
these kids are ready to rock when they're 18 years old, man. And Luke's a kid that could really have a really high ceiling. So well, I'm gonna lock this thing down, Bank. As always, you're the best. I appreciate this one. Any final thoughts? You wild week of college football. I hope that you say that this weekend will be just as bad as this past weekend was. You
Yeah,
said
wow.
this might be the worst slate we've seen, and it turned into I was like, holy cow, man!
Yeah.
All these bad games like A&M versus App State and Marshall versus Notre Dame, they turned into instant classics.
Wow.
But
Yeah.
any
The only
thoughts
thing
on
I
college?
would say,
Good.
when we do this next week, make sure you get Brandon Ennis's clips because they've had injuries down there, and Brandon's playing both ways this week.
Oh, okay.
He will play. So I want to see him play. Not that he's going to play there in college, but he's going to whack people.
Is he a
So
safety, corner, linebacker?
I think he's a linebacker, but I'll find
Oh my
out. But he's definitely
God.
playing both ways. So you might want to rip some D clips on him just to see what he's doing out there. So that's just
Oh
a
God.
little hint
Tell
for you there.
tell him to blitz him, man. Oh my God. I love the H-back. H-back. That's your boy Ricky Williams, man. He calls him the H-back because he says he eats enough to be a tight end.
Yeah,
But
dude.
oh, he
Well,
is
we'll
a
have defensive highlights next week. We can kind of
oh
see what
God.
he's got to
I
do.
hope he gets a sack. That'd be amazing.
Yeah.
So
All
well,
right.
Bank, I
Good.
appreciate your brother. Thank you so much, my man. We'll get you back next week. As always, that was Bill the Bank Greene. He's the best in the business, and he is an absolute classic of an interview. Appreciate you guys as always. Let me know who is the recruit that we need to nab for this class. We have some big time names on the list. Samson Okunloa, Mateo Uyunglele, Keon Keeley, a couple big 5-star ends, 5-star tackles. Who do we need to add to our recruiting class? I appreciate you guys as always. Thank you so much, Scoop family. Thank you, Buckeye Nation. You have a great rest of your day. Go Bucks.